people who were friends with the killers, what were your first thoughts after you found out what they had done? Before that, did you notice any strange behavior? I went to high school with an asshole. Let's call him Jeff. He didn't kill anybody, but he was always acting all creepy. He was always saying and doing weird, stupid shit. I wouldn't say he was my friend, but being both losers, we hung out in the same circles. One day he said, "Hey, there's a lady locked up in my basement, hey." Since it was Jeff, nobody paid any attention to what he said. We just called him a moron, thinking he was talking shit again. A year later, there was a story on the news. Turns out he and his uncle were actually holding a woman against her will in their house. Holy shit. I felt something was wrong. He was much more quiet than usual. He looked distant all the time, staring into the void. Actually, it was an accident, but the dude was so scared that he decided to cover his tracks, although he didn't do a very good job of it, because the cops eventually found the body. He was following the case a suspicious amount. We were sitting with him watching TV when all of a sudden the news announced that the police had found the body. The man started sobbing, and I said to him, "Dude, did you know her?" "No, it's just sad that a family lost their grandmother." I attributed his reaction to the fact that he had lost his grandmother himself a month or two before. I didn't even pay attention to the fact that it happened 2 miles from his house. At work, he began to perform his duties very poorly, constantly distracted. A little later, the police showed up at our workplace. The cops came up to him and said they had some questions for him. Before they could say a word, he fell to the floor, started sobbing, and told them everything that had happened. He confessed everything right in the workshop. Later, it turned out that he had written a letter of apology, put it in a Ziploc bag, and left it by the body. The office asked for some document that had his handwriting on it. Upon checking it, it appeared that the handwriting was a complete match. There was damage to the front of his pickup truck, and the victim's DNA was found on the bumper. The victim's family realized it was an accident and expressed their sympathy for the poor man. He was sent to prison for a couple years, of which he only served half. When he got out, the first thing he did was to dispose of his pickup truck in a junkyard. He said he couldn't see anything else that reminded him of that night. Unfortunately, he went all the way, and shortly afterward, he took his own life. The victim's family forgave him. They were one of the last people he called before he drank himself out. He wasn't a bad guy. It was just an accident. There was a period when I was in a mental institution, waiting for a trial. There, I became friends with a guy suffering from schizophrenia, and we socialized with him every day. He was smart, charismatic, friendly, and a pretty funny dude. Aside from the times he communicated with the voices in his head, he usually burst into tears when talking to them. One time, he was allowed to drive down to his family's house for the weekend. He went and beat them all to death with a hammer. He also killed a Chinese exchange student who was staying with them. When I was serving my sentence, 2 cellmates accused of murder were sitting with me. One was only 21. He was very smart and very kind, generous and nice guy. The guy was a PCP dealer, and then he got hooked on it. After a week of smoking his stiff, during a hallucination, he saw the world burning around him and thought he was in hell. He ran home and kicked open the front door. His father, with whom he was on great terms, was sitting in the living room in a rocking chair. Dude thought it was the devil sitting on his throne. He pulled out his gun and fired the entire clip into his father's chest, at point-blank range. He never realized what he'd done until it hit him. Kid was 21, and he was sentenced to 60 years. By the time I was released, he had become a close friend. I think about him often, even though he asked me not to write or visit him. He was consumed by guilt and wanted all the people who knew him to erase him from memory. A tragic story. Another cellmate of mine did 18 years for murder, got out, and 2 weeks later went back in for murder and armed robbery. He tried to get back on the right track, but ended up getting back in touch with his old buddies. One of them robbed a check cashing place and killed the clerk in a shootout. My cellmate never even got out of the car. He had no idea what his buddy was planning to do. Bottom line, both were charged with murder, and given his past convictions, my cellmates, and the fact that he was out on parole, he was given a life sentence. He was a wise and friendly man in prison, looking out for us young guys and trying to set an example for us on how not to do things. It is with great warmth that I regard him. That said, I feel very sorry for the family of the guy who died. In short, I had an interesting life. She wasn't my friend, but my older sister's closest friend. They had been friends since they were kids, all the way through high school, so she was like a second sister to me. At some point, both of them started having serious substance problems. Eventually, my sister decided that for the sake of her recovery, she should no longer hang out with her friend. Years passed, and suddenly we learned that the girl was arrested for the murder of an old lady she was shoveling snow for. As it turned out, the old woman accused my sister's ex-girlfriend of stealing her credit card, and she beat her to death. She never struck me as anything strange. She was just a normal teenage girl, a straight-A student, an athlete, well-liked by everyone, and unlike my sister, she never got in trouble at school. We knew each other for about 3 years. Dude killed and robbed his best friend while he was selling Christmas trees. Dude was fun to be around, nice to talk to, and didn't have a temper at all. And he was on heavy shit. Coconut, hard. But he kinda got hooked after the murder. He wasn't a suspect at the time. We just didn't talk to him. And then one day, when he was high, he decided to fuck with us about what he did. And he got arrested. I never would have thought he could have done such a thing. To be honest, it really scared me and my friends. I lost all trust in people after that. He wasn't a friend of mine, but I crossed paths with him a couple times. Robert Long. This man set fire to a tourist hostel in Queensland, Australia. We were both living there at the time. 15 people died in the fire he started. 2 days before the incident happened, I continued my journey and traveled onward. My first thought was, holy shit. Then I had fear for the people I knew and befriended, fear for their condition. Then I realized how close I was to possible death myself. Then, when the names of those killed began to be announced, I had a moment of disbelief and realized that I knew many of them and had lived side by side with them. Then I began to take what had happened as a personal tragedy. I watched the news around the clock and prayed to the universe that the police would find the killer on the run. I hoped they'd kill the son of a bitch. And when they finally caught him and threw him in jail for the rest of his life, I said, well, I hope you rot in there. And then I slowly started to forget about everything, because I was lucky, and neither I nor my friends were killed. And then, years later, when I had children, this incident started to pop up in my mind from time to time. For example, at times when my child starts talking about how someday he will travel and he will stay in hostels. I started working on a construction site, and in the first week I found out that the foreman's wife had recently been found dead. Everyone thought she had committed suicide. The cops couldn't find the woman for a few days, then asked the husband if there were any places they went together, and he said they sometimes raced at the hills shooting. Cops eventually found her in a freezer, the door to which was locked. After that, I found out that woman was his second wife, and the first one died after falling from a height while hiking with him. Everyone is convinced that he killed them both, but the police never found any proof, and he was never convicted. I stayed away from him all the time at work, although I think it was only the women he was dating who needed to be afraid of him. A week after his wife was found, he was already showing me the girls from the dating site he was dating. A former coworker of mine killed his mother. It's been over 10 years since I last saw him. this guy always struck me as odd, and not just socially. He had nervous tics all the time. It was like his hands and face were always twitching. I thought he had Tourette's or something and was trying to control it somehow. Maybe that's what it was. But as I read articles on his court case, I learned a lot more about him. It turned out that he struggled with schizophrenia during college. He wrote letters to celebrities as if he knew them personally. Nevertheless, he underwent treatment, was very strongly supported by his family, and after a few years, the dude was recognized as normal, after which he was able to live and work independently. Then, after getting a job at a studio, we worked together on a TV show, and seeing the stars live, he basically revived his past hallucinations. Looking back in the past, I remember several instances when, during filming, at the sight of a celebrity on stage, he would freeze. He would have a huge smile on his face, and it was as if he was in another world. At one point, he abruptly quit his job, and I never saw him again. Turns out he went back to live with his family, and they continued to help him. I don't know exactly what happened during this time, but at some point he developed self-sabotaging tendencies. He even stole a shotgun from his father. One day when his mother came home, he was sitting in the apartment with the shotgun in his hands. Being in an unstable state, he shot her with the gun. The police arrived, and he fired several shots at them, hoping one of the cops would kill him. That didn't happen, and the dude ended up turning himself in after all. He's now serving time in prison, even though his own family was in favor of him being sent to a mental hospital.